communication obviously is changing. It's not the same to communicate with my daughter than it is to communicate with someone else. But I think the thing that has become almost essential is how do you communicate the complex in the simplest way possible? And how do you ensure that you communicate as succinctly as possible with the least amount of words that are going to create the most amount of action with the best words that are easy for everybody to understand?
This is the Leadership Foundry podcast. I'm your host this week, Brandon Smith. And we've got a real treat this week. A little bit of pun intended in that statement. We have Graciela Chadwick. She is the COO of Crumbl Cookies. I've known Graciela for some time, and it was a real joy to have her come on the show and share her leadership lessons. Not only did she talk about some of the challenges of being a leader in a franchise business, and being a leader in a franchisor business, because she's had many, many years of experience in that world with multiple different companies. She talked about just some great principles of leadership today. I particularly want you to pay attention to her emphasis and constant restatement of the balance between results and relationships. And the great leaders really balance the two. I know you're in store for a great conversation. Take lots of notes, and of course stay tuned to the very end, and I'll share some of my highlights. Graciela, so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me here, Brandon. I am just humbled. I listen to your podcast. You have great guests, and I just can't believe that I'm here. So grateful for this time together.
Well, I know we were trying to make it work, and I'm so glad we were able to, because we've known each other for a while. So maybe for listeners that don't know you and your story, you're at Crumbl Cookie now. You're the COO of Crumbl Cookies.
Yes.
But it would be interesting for them to hear your journey. What got you into this seat?
Well, first and foremost, I grew up in Mexico City, and my father was always very, very keen on ensuring that we got a great education. I come from a middle-class family, but my father really valued education. So he made a lot of sacrifices to put me and my three brothers in the best possible schools. So as a result of that, I always had big dreams to honor my father's investment and hopefully, do great things in the business world. But I never dreamed that I will have an opportunity to come to the US. So I came to the US really thinking that I'll be only here for 1 or 2 years with a consulting job that got me here. And I came when I was 24 years old in 99. And I was working with KPMG Consulting, and I really told myself, well, I'm just going there to learn. I'm going to be there for 1 year and go back home, because I knew I was going to miss my family tremendously. I have a very big family, and I never expected to stay. But 1 year became 2 and then 3. And then one of my clients at KPMG invited me to come and work for them in Miami for Burger King. So that's really when my food career started, and I knew nothing about fast food. I had been doing technology up to that point. And when I went to Miami, I said to myself, well, I'll be here only for 1 year, and then I'll go back home. And long story short, I met my husband there. We got married, and then I stayed. But that's how my journey in food started. After we got married, Burger King had nepotism policy, so one of us had to leave. So my husband left and I stayed, but he soon got a job in Atlanta. So then I came to Atlanta with him, knowing nothing about Atlanta. And when I arrived here, I started my own consulting firm, because I had previously come from that background, and I just wanted to sort of like be home. I was pregnant and about to have my first baby and do consulting. So it was really funny. I had never done marketing research, but a friend in Miami asked me if I could help a friend of hers with marketing research. And I said, well, I know nothing. So if he's okay with that, I'll be happy to help in any way I can. And I worked for him literally remotely, way before the pandemic or anything like that. I worked remotely for this client of mine in Miami for 2 years. And then after that, I helping my husband do some research. That's how I ended up founding my next job, which was with Chick-fil-A. And I started with Chick-fil-A, not knowing actually much about Chick-fil-A. And I stayed there for 14 amazing years. So I learned so much about leadership at Chick-fil-A, and it was really an incredible journey. And after 14 years there, working in different departments, from analytics all the way to operations and support, I got this incredible opportunity to come and really help these young, hip, incredible company to continue on their growth. And I didn't know much about Crumbl, but I was very grateful that I have a teenage daughter, and she knew everything that there was to know about Crumbl. So she was my best resource as I prepared for my first interview. And that's kind of how I got here.
So how long has Crumbl Cookies been around?
Crumbl Cookies is a very young company. We're only 6 years old.
Okay.
And a true, I think, phenomena when it comes to the food industry, especially, the dessert area, because somehow they managed to do things that I thought to be impossible, which is to have a weekly rotating menu. So that's pretty big accomplishment when you think about training bakers on all these new cookies every single week and making sure that they could be executed properly, building the supply chain to deliver on all the ingredients, etc. So it's been definitely a fun and challenging experience, but one that has really taught me a lot, but also give me the opportunity to share my knowledge and my leadership lessons with so many incredible young people that work at Crumbl.
So what's really fascinating about your career is you've been in different kinds of companies. Burger King is very different than Chick-fil-A, which is very different than Crumbl Cookie, but they all have this similar franchisee kind of structure and model.
Yes.
And so leading in that environment probably has some interesting challenges. So what were some of the things that you've learned in not only in kind of the food world, but also in the restaurant world, but also in that kind of dynamic? What are some of those unique challenges that you've learned as a leader?
Yeah, so I mean, the reality is that there are challenges, but I think there's also principles that apply no matter what, right? I think when you are in a franchisor relationship, you need to understand that at the end, this is a partnership and you have to make it work. You're going to go through challenges. You're going to have tension always between the franchisee and the franchisor, but you need to commit that at the end, it is the customer in any business, right? That's the unique thing. So no matter whether you're in a regular traditional business or a franchisor business, the customer is ultimately the one that's going to determine the success of a company and whether or not you have a product that people want and that changes people's lives and that enriches people's lives. So that's really at the end the most common thing that you have, no matter the other challenges. But even I think in traditional companies, you have to have great partnerships. My career, I started it in the consulting world. So I equate that very similar sometimes to a franchisee-franchisor relationship, because at the end, I was there for my clients and I was serving those clients. And if those clients were not successful, then the project was not successful no matter what. And it's kind of like the same in the franchisee-franchisor role. You're there to serve both customers and franchise partners, and customers have to be obviously successful and franchise partners have to be successful, whatever that definition is, for everybody to be successful at the same time.
So I love that point that you make that is so just honest, that there's always going to be tension. It's just naturally part of that dynamic. And it makes me think of senior teams where you have like a chief marketing officer and a CFO. There's always going to be some level of tension. But what I love about what you said, which is a simple but very helpful tip, is make it about the customer first. If you make it about the customer, it can help you kind of navigate that partnership a little bit better and not have quite that same level of tension.
Yes.
So if we look back over the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, supply chain, all that stuff's been challenging. Restaurant world's been challenging. What have you seen as some of the biggest challenges in your world, both when you were Chick-fil-A and then now Crumbl Cookie? Just maybe it's just from an economic standpoint or a landscape standpoint. What are some of the biggest leadership challenges that leaders in that world have had to overcome?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, there are a lot of challenges. So when you think just about the operation in itself, I think the biggest challenges that I saw both at Chick-fil-A and at Crumbl is the complexity of the operation. So obviously for Chick-fil-A, the operation is very complex because even though you may have the same menu items, right, the volumes are really high. So how do you figure out how to make the complex simple so that people can execute consistently, right? The restaurant business depends on consistent execution, right? When you go to a restaurant to eat or you want to get whatever food item, you want it to be the same with the same kind of quality, the same kind of taste over and over, no matter which one you go, right? You can be traveling from here to there, you encounter, a Chick-fil-A, you encounter a Crumbl. You want that quality and that experience to be the same no matter what, because you're purchasing from a brand, not from the local person. But at the same time, what is challenging too is that you also do want that local, store operator and owner to know their community, engage in their community, so then they can create something special there. So that is one of the challenges that you will encounter when you want to do things consistently and execute flawlessly with the same kind of quality around many stores, no matter where you are in the United States, and of course, internationally too.
So when you're going around, I know you talk about visiting some of the stores, which I'm sure makes those franchisees a little uncomfortable seeing you walk in the door. So when you walk in there and you're trying to motivate them or inspire them or focus them, what are some of the messages that you're giving to them?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So first, I always want to start to get to know people, right? So I really try very hard to make sure that I get to know people's names, but also to ask them questions. I think when you ask people questions sincerely, you can, engage them in a way that they can begin to understand what's important. So I always try to ask them, hey, tell me about your favorite customer, or tell me what is one thing that we don't offer to customers that they want and they're asking for. That helps me understand, what's happening for them and what's happening in the business. Then I always like to ask, well, what is the most challenging thing for you here, right? What is there in the day-to-day is maybe too hard to do? And do you have ideas on how to make it better, right? I always think that the best ideas comes from the people that are doing these jobs day in and day out because they're the experts. I'm not the expert on it, but I think my role is just to listen, and then the more visits I do, I can start to see maybe a common theme, or maybe certain things that are like, oh, we should really figure out a way to work on this, to make this better, to simplify it, or potentially to remove some steps. Maybe there's too many steps on a process that maybe are not necessary. So the best ideas and the best things that I've been able to work on or take on to our teams to have work on are ideas that really have come from the field and from asking questions and then observing, oh, maybe this has too many steps, it's too complicated. Why can't we remove one step, etc., without obviously having the quality suffer? So once you learn that, I think it's easier then for people to know that you really are trying to understand versus you're trying to, go there and correct or find all the problems. In an operation, there's always going to be things that don't go perfect. And, as long as you keep the big picture and everything else is working as expected, I always have believed that people don't really go to work to try to fail, right? If something's not working as expected, it's probably because something happened, but nobody intentionally, doesn't want to clean properly or get all their tasks executed properly. It's just a matter of understanding, well, what's happening that's preventing potentially from these being executed in a seamless way over and over, really by anyone.
I love that. I love just that you're going into all those conversations with a spirit of curiosity. I think often people think, oh, someone's come from headquarters, they're going to be judging me or evaluating me, but you're really listening and trying to learn, build a relationship, learn more about their customers, learn more about their challenges and how they might solve them. And also assuming that, I love this term, assume positive intent.
Yeah.
You're assuming positive intent. Everyone's trying to do a good job. So if they're not able to, what's getting in the way? And maybe that's something that we can solve for.
Yeah.
So I'm going to flip it a little bit. So you've visited now lots and lots of franchisees within Crumbl Cookie, and you've probably had some exposure to owner-operators in the Chick-fil-A world. Mm-hmm. When you've encountered those individuals that are just doing a phenomenal job, what's different about their leadership? What have you noticed that makes a leader in that world stand out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in my observations, the people that have the best operations and the best culture in their stores is because they're very intentional. What I mean by that is they have a plan, they have a way to execute the plan, they have a way to follow up on the plan, and they have a way to improve on their plans. I have encountered many of our owners that have created systems on top of our systems, right, to make things easier for their people. But I think also you have to strike always a balance, and I learned this at Chick-fil-A, between results and relationships. So in the Chick-fil-A model, I learned a lot about what it means to be a servant leader. And I think sometimes people don't really understand properly what that means, because it just doesn't mean that you're going to, serve everybody and never check on the results, right? That's not really what it means. The serve model at Chick-fil-A highlights that leaders need to see and shape the future. They need to engage and develop others. They need to reinvent themselves continuously. They need to value results and relationships, and then they need to embody the values. And what was really interesting for me to learn through my years is that as a person, you're usually wired one way or the other. You're either wired for results or you're wired for relationships. And that's just natural. And if you really understand yourself and you're self-aware, you can very easily know if you're one or the other. And that doesn't make you better. If you're more relationships oriented, it doesn't make you better than the people that are more results oriented. What the hard work is that the people that are relationships oriented need to find a balance to the middle, and the people that are results oriented need to find a balance to the middle too. And it is only from the middle that you can be the most successful, because you need to be able to do both really well, which is a challenge for all of us because we're usually wired one way or the other. And then once you're leading from that middle is when you truly can become the best leader to serve and help others. And this is one of the key learnings that I myself was challenged with, and I had to change myself significantly in order to be a better leader for those around me.
So what were some of the things you had to do to change?
Oh my goodness, a lot. So I am wired normally in myself, I'm wired more for results. I grew up with 3 brothers. They were very tough. And my dad was very tough. My dad's a doctor, but I will say people that my dad could have been in the military. So every time that anything was happening in my house, my dad was all about, you need to have A+ and nothing else, and don't come here to me crying. You better have a plan, right, for how things are going to get better. So I had to get rid of any emotion that I may have been born with to survive in my household with all of those men. Thankfully, I had an incredible mom who's all about relationships. So I think she was my saving grace when I was growing up. But as I entered the business world, I really thought that the business world was going to be the place where I will shine because, hey, I grew up with these tough guys. So clearly, I can make it in the business world. And I think I didn't realize until much later that those emotional intelligence skills are really the most important skills to be a great leader. I always thought it was all about what you know and all your incredible education, because that's what my father, right, had valued so much in my life. So I always thought it was about being smart. And when I grew up at school, even just in high school and whatever, I was never the most popular girl in school, right? So the way I try to combat that was, well, I'm going to be the smartest. If I cannot be the prettiest, I'm going to be the smartest. So I grew up with these things in my head about how to be successful that were really not really true. They were, a base, they were a foundation, but that was not what was going to help me and allow me to make other people better, which was always my desire because I had that from my mother. My mother was an incredible hospitality person. She was giving of herself all the time. She embodies nothing but love for others. I mean, my mom is the one that taught me, if you don't have anything good to say about anyone, then don't say anything. And that was hard, right? Especially when you're a teenager and there's all this gossip going around. But I always try to make sure that I was honoring my mom by doing that, even if it was hard. And now I think that, oh my goodness, my mom would have been the most brilliant business leader if she would have ever had the chance. She would have been the most amazing leader in the world. And she is in her house and with those around her. But I didn't really realize that until I started getting feedback about my own leadership, right? And I still remember the first guy that ever told me about, you sound so smart, but do you know how you're coming across with other people? And, obviously I was in shock, but I was so grateful. And the best part of all is that this guy didn't even really work with me. He was not my boss. He didn't work directly with me. He was from another department. And the way he gave me this feedback was one, obviously, of shock, because as I said, nobody ever thinks that what you're doing is not what you're supposed to be doing. I mean, nobody does things intentionally wrong. Everybody wants to do great. But it really helped me think deeply about this, right? Obviously, when he told me this, I was resistant. I was angry. I didn't say anything. I obviously just say thank you because thankfully my mom had educated me to be polite. But internally, I was in this struggle and this battle, I don't think this is true. Clearly, right? He's just jealous or whatever. And I finally came to terms okay, why will he ever say this to me? He has nothing to gain. He doesn't work with me. He's not my boss. He really was just trying to shed some truth in my life that probably everybody else saw, but nobody was willing to have the courage to tell me. And that is what started in me a journey to try to understand that better. And then, of course, through life, you start to see a pattern, right? When more people tell you the same thing, you're like, oh yeah, clearly I am the problem. And then I remember having this great boss at Chick-fil-A, and she told me, the only common denominator of all of our problems is ourselves. And I was like, oh, yes, absolutely, right? If I want to make things better in my world, probably I need to change myself, not try to change others. So that really started a journey for me. And then I remember I really believed that I would have not gotten this opportunity with Crumbl if I would have not had this experience that I had. And I think it was either 2019 or something like that. But right before COVID started, my daughter is a big book reader and I love her so much. So every weekend I take her to Barnes & Noble. So she buys her books and I just go around looking also for new books or things. And I remember seeing this book on the shelf called Partnering by,
right
yes, exactly, by Jan Allwine. And I've never heard of her. I've never heard anything about this book. And I read this book, and to me, that book really was almost like the last thing that I needed to fully transform myself from the inside. And I think really what I've learned is that to be a great leader, you have to have two things, I think. Many others, but two important things. One is you have to have an open mind, and you have to have an open heart. And if you are thinking about being smart, you're probably not going to have either. So you need to make sure that you change yourself to not thinking about being the smartest person in the room, but thinking about how can I be the most giving person in the room. And I think Simon Sinek talks a lot about this. How do you show up with a giving either heart or mind or whatever it is? And I think it's only when you truly, truly show up with a giving mind and a giving heart that you can make things better for everybody around you. But it's not easy because, as I said, we all have our tendencies. But it's only with deep self-awareness, deep self-reflection, and putting yourself in places that will challenge you to do that more, that you can really then expand your leadership.
Graciela, that was beautiful. I love that. And what I love about it is a couple things. First, you gave us a good kind of litmus test. You said we have to balance relationship and results. And the answer is always somewhere in the middle. And we're somewhere on that spectrum. And the path to figuring that out is feedback. But you have to be open to feedback. You have to have an open mind and an open heart. And be willing to hear it, which not everybody's open to feedback. And then there's being open to feedback and then being willing to change.
Yes.
So if you're open to feedback and willing to change, and you've got some level of emotional intelligence and an interest in developing that, then you can get yourself closer to the middle, and that's where success lies. I love that. It gives us a nice path forward. Okay, so before I ask my final question, we're going to go into the crystal ball a little bit. Put a crystal ball out here. And when you think about the next 3 years in the restaurant world and the franchise world and all the challenges in that, and challenges from getting and keeping talented associates and team members. I know people talk a lot about the challenges of finding talent, to keeping customers, to managing all the challenges. What do you think are going to be the key leadership traits that are necessary going forward as you look into the future?
Wow. To be honest, I'm all about there is beauty in the foundational leadership skills that I think will never change. In my mind, one of the most important leadership traits that someone needs to develop is communication skills. Communication obviously is changing. It's not the same to communicate with my daughter than it is to communicate with someone else. But I think the thing that has become almost essential is how do you communicate the complex in the simplest way possible? And how do you ensure that you communicate as succinctly as possible with the least amount of words that are going to create the most amount of action with the best words that are easy for everybody to understand. And that is so important because in order to be successful, I think now more than ever, people want to know very quickly as a company, what are you about? How are you going to enhance my life? As a person, people want to spend time with people that are also going to enhance their lives. As a leader, you want a leader that's going to enhance your life. And it's going to make the world better, right? We've heard this trend that is not just a trend. I mean, I think it's part of our humanity. It's just that before, things were not done that way. We all want to live and be part of a higher purpose. And I think that has become even more relevant because COVID really showed us how short life is, right? And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to go and help Crumbl, because when you think about it, my first question to the founder was, okay, what are you really trying to do? What are you all about? And really, for me, it was so amazing to hear and to help him even hone more that purpose, which is, when we die, when you know that you have very few hours, days, or months to live, the biggest regret that most of us will have at that time is that we didn't spend more time with those that we love the most. And at the end, right, that is, as a company, what we're trying to create. We're trying to make sure that people create and have the opportunities to create more meaningful moments with those that matter most. We may do it through whatever, right? Through cookies, through events, so many more things to come in the future, but we're not about a product. We're about creating an experience with others, and that's what all of us want in our life.
So normally I ask, what's one practical thing that us as leaders can start doing tomorrow to be better for our teams? I want to build on what you said because I think there's something there. So how, as leaders, how can we start to answer some of those questions? What is our why, or how do we get to that place where we can start to communicate that? What's a good starting place to almost develop our own little mantra?
Yeah, that is so interesting. As us personally, as individuals. Yeah, and I've done a lot of work in my life to figure out mine too. But to be honest, I think there's tons of resources out there. And I'm not an expert on this. So first, I want to say that. But what I want to share is you have to do the hard work of either reading some of those resources or putting yourself in a place of really tracking the things that you do and ensuring that after you've done them, you connect them to, okay, does this make me feel in the ways that I want to feel every day? Or is this something that ultimately helps me in my journey to continue to discover myself? But there's great resources out there. In fact, my friend Elizabeth Dixon just wrote a new book on the power of purpose. And I hope I'm getting the name right, but I haven't read it. I have it in my Kindle for one of my next books to read. But there are so many books written about that, right? And I think at the end, your calling is hard to discover. But what I tell people is, if there's anything worth doing, you have to do it with excellence. So if you're going to wash the dishes, wash them with excellence. If you're going to go do whatever it is that you're going to do, whether you think you have no power in the world, whether you're, a kid going through school or whatever is in front of you, just do it with excellence. Because I think that regardless of your purpose, there is deep satisfaction that comes to a person when you do something with excellence. And and I think leaders show leadership when they do things with excellence and the right things when no one's looking, right? When no one's looking, if you do the right things and you do things with excellence, you're going to feel great about yourself. And then I think in life, the more things you do, the more you're going to discover what your purpose is. And the best advice that I can give people is don't try to copy somebody else. I mean, we see people with great purpose and say, oh, that should be our purpose or whatever. And believe me, I've been victim of that. I've tried that, right? Because it's just so tempting I want to attach to this cause. That is going to not use the best of your abilities and your given talent, right? That you have within you. But it is tempting. And it's better to say, I haven't discovered my purpose, but I want to live life with excellence or whatever, do the best with what I have in front of me, than to try to copy somebody's purpose.
This was fantastic. If people want to learn more about Crumbl, more about you, where can they go?
Well, I mean, I am the only social media, for the most part, that I personally involve myself with is LinkedIn. So they can always look there. If they want to DM me or whatever through LinkedIn, that's always great for me. And then obviously if they want to learn more about Crumbl, it's Crumbl.com. So if you go to Crumbl without an E at the end, you can find all sorts of things. We have an incredible app. If you want to download our app, you can find out every Sunday night about the cookies for the following week. And choose your favorite one. You can write your cookies. You can do all sorts of fun things in our app. And I always love it. Even if I'm not going to go that week, I always love seeing the beautiful photos and the cookies and read all about, what's new. So great things to come. And And
how many stores are you up to now?
We have now about 990 stores, and yeah, it's an amazing feat. We're also in Canada. I think we have now 6 stores in Canada, and obviously more to come this year.
So is there going to be a new cookie come out when you hit 1,000 stores?
Oh, we have new cookies every week. So every single week, we introduce the new cookie from now until the end of the year. And every year, we introduce new cookies. So yeah, so they rotate every week. And then we have a new cookie every single week until the end of the year. There's a fun surprise that I cannot reveal the week of December 10th. So be on the lookout for that fun surprise.
Yes. December 10th.
Yes.
Okay.
And then, and then you can vote also on your cookies. You can get reminded of your favorite cookie. And of course, we always have our staple cookie, which is the chocolate chip cookie. So we rotate that every week. One week we have the semi-sweet. Another week we have the milk chocolate chip cookie, because pretty much we're all divided. I don't know in your house, but in my house, half of us like the milk and half of us like the semi-sweet. So, it's fun when they both come around, because we can all have our favorite.
Thank you for coming around. I really, really appreciate this. This was such an awesome interview. You gave us so many great nuggets. So thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It was really such a pleasure to be here. I learned so much from you when I was at Emory, and I'm just grateful for all that you're doing for so many leaders around the world.
I love my conversation with Graciela. She really got on a roll and had so many beautiful, really insightful things for us. I'm definitely going to have her back. First, she started off with the complexity of the franchisee-franchisor world. And she talked about it's a partnership, but there's always a tension there. On top of that, customers want things consistent, and yet there's so much complexity in a restaurant. Whether we're offering new cookies every week, like the Crumbl Cookies is, or the complexity of even being in a Chick-fil-A. And she said the best leaders, they do a couple things. And looking at my notes here, they ask questions. They get curious. So she talks about when she goes into stores, she's not being critical. She's being curious. She's asking about customers, asking about the challenges that those franchisors or franchisees might be experiencing. She says nothing has to be perfect, and we're always trying to assume positive intent. And then that's when she really got into that beautiful nugget about that balance between relationships and results. And she shared her journey and realization of that. And she said the key is being open-minded and having an open heart, being open to feedback, being willing to change. There was many, many more great nuggets in our conversation. I'm sure you took away some of your own, but really make a point to think about what was that one takeaway that you had. Maybe it is around relationships and results and how you could put that in place today to help your teams starting tomorrow.